Hello, everyone, and welcome to this conversation presented by White House Custom Color.
Are you trying to mute me?
No, it's just real loud, and I can't.
I sold Amazon when it was $25.
Listening to listen, not listening to respond.
Yes! Oh, thank you for that. Hey, everyone. I just had the pleasure of speaking with one of the very first canon explorers of light, David Hume Kennerly. He is amazing. There's a quote from James Earl Jones that says, David Hume Kennerly is like Forrest Gump, except he was really there. That is so very true. As I was looking through his images, it's like, oh, I've seen that one, and I've seen that one, and I've seen that one. And then hearing him talk about some of the background for some of what he's been through and what he's seen, it was just a fantastic experience. I'm calling this the truth teller because that's exactly what he has done. That's exactly who he is. So enjoy. I've done a lot of these interviews, a couple hundred of them in the last couple years. And I started looking into you more and more and more and realized that I was a lot more familiar with your work than I expected. Because I never know who I'm going to talk to, right? These aren't planned out too far in advance.
Right.
And the more I discovered, the more nervous I became.
Oh dear. No reason for that.
I cannot believe what you have seen and where you have been and what you have done.
I can't either. We're even.
Same page.
Somebody the other day was asking me about all this stuff because I've been at it since I was a kid, really. And I said it's hard to believe that any one person could have taken all those pictures, and it's harder for me to believe that I was the one who did it, even though I did it. I mean, it's when you stretch stuff out over 50 years, and like this year's the 50th year that I first went to Vietnam, 50 years ago. I mean, think about that. That's a long time ago, and I just turned 24, and it was such a big experience for me, and it was so important to do it for me. But I never get over it. I've never taken it for granted. I remember when I used to drive into the White House, they'd see me coming, the gates would open. Hey, Dave, how you doing? Like I'd drive right through the gate and park on West Exec, like 4 spots up from the vice president's car, and go into the West Wing with my office. And every day I did it was like, somebody's going to find me out here. They're going to, I'm going to get arrested.
You're like an imposter syndrome as you're walking into the White House.
I mean, and I know a lot of people. I produced a movie one time based on my Vietnam days, and the director said he had that. He said one of these days they're going to come and like arrest him for attempting to direct. And so, but I think. My attitude has been the same about that. Even though I'm like past 70, I hit 74 in March. I still have the mind of an 18-year-old, I think, but I still have the same enthusiasm for what I do. And as long as I can do that, I'm fine. I don't think I'm that different from when I was when I started.
I believe that. I wanted to ask you about Vietnam in particular.
Go ahead.
Well, because here's the thing. What I'd like to hear from you as someone with such a unique perspective, in my estimation, is you're 24 years old, right? You're going over there. Did you have any sense at all at the time what it was that you were getting into?
that's a really good question. And yes, the simple answer. But when I graduated from high school, from Westland High in Oregon in 1965, at that point, the Vietnam War was just starting to crank up. And I had a lot of classmates then who got drafted, and four of them were killed over there. And these are guys that I took pictures of playing football and being the high school photographer, the paper, the annual, doing all that. There probably wasn't anybody in the school that I hadn't photographed or at least talked to. And I was fairly gregarious, so I would get around. And then I went on to become a photographer for the Oregon Journal, then for the Oregonian. Then I moved to LA to work for UPI, which was in late 67. And then I moved to New York in 1970 for UPI, and then, or 69 rather, and then 70. And all this time, I'm seeing the pictures come out of Vietnam, like Eddie Adams' classic photo of the guy getting shot in the head, the execution in 1968. He won the Pulitzer in 69. And I just had this overriding feeling that I needed to go there for many reasons. One, I was my chosen field was to be a news photographer. Mm-hmm. And I also felt I had an obligation to my buddies, like to go and see for myself what it was that killed them. I mean, I knew what was going on, obviously. And ironically, I was never really political about the war. I didn't feel I had a dog in the hunt, like anti-war, pro-war, whatever. As a news person, I think all I want to do is see what's going on, like to see for myself, to take the pictures for myself. And that was strong motivation for me. But to answer your question, yes, I knew what I was getting into. And I think, and I look back again at the year I graduated from high school, there was this great Life magazine story that came out, Yankee Papa 13 by Larry Burroughs, who was one of the great Life photographers. And that story really affected me because it had a beginning, a middle, and an end. It was a story of this kind of happy-go-lucky crew chief on a Marine helicopter, and followed him through his day. And the first shot, he's smiling and carrying the guns to put in the chopper. And then they take these Vietnamese into battle. And then one of their fellow helicopters got shot down, and they went to rescue them. And they carried this one guy in. And the cover of the magazine is one of the most incredible pictures ever. And there's a dead comrade of his, and this guy's kind of screaming. But when they got back to their base, the last photo in the essay was this guy alone in a warehouse or something on a bunch of boxes, that he's like weeping. And that was one of the strongest things I'd ever seen. You weren't used to seeing pictures like that. Vietnam, it's like a lot of bang bang or action, or I mean, you see dead people and all. But that the arc of the drama there and the arc of the tragedy really was so evident, and that profoundly affected me. But on my way out in Vietnam, and it's worth noting, the last assignment I covered was the Ali Frazier fight in Madison Square Garden in March 8th, 1971. And I remember the date very well. And I had a ringside seat, and the picture I took of Ali getting knocked down in the 15th round was on the front page of the New York Times the next day, which also happened to be my 24th birthday. So when I woke up, I was staying at Dirk Halstead's place in New York City. And there was my picture on the front of the New York Times, credited, of course, to UPI, but it was mine. And it was mind-boggling. But about 2 weeks, no, maybe a month earlier, I can't remember. I was going out to Vietnam to replace Kent Potter, who was moving to Thailand. I think he was going to stay in the area. I never met him, but he and Larry Burroughs, my hero, whom I've never met, and 2 other photographers, Henry Hewitt of AP, were shot down over Laos in an operation called Lamsad 719. And that was I think the first moment I realized that I might not make it back from there.
Oh,
I really hadn't thought about the mortality part
Right.
of it. I mean, I knew, like
of course.
not only soldiers, all these people, my friends had been killed,
Yeah.
but because I was going to replace this one photographer, that really personalized it. It scared the shit out of me. I mean,
Mhm.
I started thinking about that, and I talked to a couple of my buddies who had been out there, Bill Sneed and Dirk also, but Dirk was a mentor to me, really. And he was one of the first photographers. Eddie Adams, also, the 2 of them covered the Marines coming ashore at Da Nang in 1965. And I just told him about my misgivings. But I also said, I'm going to go. I would never forgive myself if I didn't go.
Right. Right.
But I was scared. I was scared. I at that point, I hadn't really honestly thought about it that much. And I've been kind of going over a lot of this stuff lately. I'm writing a book, 50 stories from my life, and which I'm in the process of. And that's one of the stories. And like the long way around of answering your question, which was the perfect question, because that was like, why do any of us do what we do? And why did anybody go to Vietnam when they didn't have to, which was a question I would be asked all the time when I would show up out in the field and getting shot at with the GIs. They couldn't believe that anybody that didn't have to be there would be there. I totally got that concept. And I think part of and I know so many photographers who did it and photographers who didn't make it back, certainly. In fact, in my own case, I was 24 when I got there, and I had a lot of combat experience in that first year. And in fact, it was the pictures I took in 1971 that won me the Pulitzer Prize in 1972. And there were like 11 or 12 pictures in the portfolio. One of them was the Ali Frazier fight knockdown picture. Nobody had it like that. And it was a classic shot. But I never thought I would see my 25th birthday. I mean, there were so many occasions that I had close calls, and I never intimated that I wasn't frightened on occasion. But the question is, how do you deal with it? And it's overcoming your own anxiety and fear to do what you want to do. And that's not just being a combat photographer. Really, that's in so many different things that we do, like getting in front of an audience and giving a talk. I'm sure you've done it. And somebody said that scares people more than anything.
It scares me more than anything.
No, but I understand it. I get it.
But I haven't been in Vietnam. Like one of the reasons I ask you the question is because, like you said earlier, I look back and sometimes and maybe you said this kind of in jest, and I'll butcher exactly how you said it, but you essentially were saying, like, I can't even believe, some of the things that I've gone through or some of the things that happened to me.
No, that wasn't a jest. That was a serious statement.
Well, and so what it made me think of with Vietnam in particular is that I feel as though, like, through my lifetime, I remember the first half of my life. I'm 46. I was born in 75. The first half of my life, Vietnam was a much bigger deal. Lots
You
of
were
movies
born,
about Vietnam, lots
you
of
were born
discussion
during
about Vietnam.
You were born during the Ford presidency.
Right. I was, right.
A Gerald Ford
And-
baby.
Yes, exactly. And so, but what I was thinking about is that it seems as though society or our culture does the same thing that you were talking about. Like it's almost hard for society or culture to even think about or talk about Vietnam in the ways that we used to. It's almost like, and I don't want to say it's like it didn't happen, but the impact of it has certainly shifted and changed over the years. And part of that's the passing of time.
Sure.
But I feel like that makes what you went through and what people like you do when you are in those positions, especially when you don't have to be, it makes it that much more important, doesn't it? Because you were there and you captured what was happening.
Yeah, because I recently had my archive acquired for the Center by the Center for Creative Photography in Arizona, University of Arizona in Tucson. And it's the home of the Ansel Adams Archive and Edward Weston and Richard Avedon and Gary Winogrand and on and on. But one of the reasons they were attracted to my archive, certainly it's about photography because that's my vehicle, but it really was also about history. And just what you're saying. I mean, we have I'm a direct report from the action. I come in with eyewitness experience and the pictures to prove it kind of thing. But I find that the value of my pictures certainly is in the photographs, but it's really, what are they? This is not just pictures of Hollywood. These are not pictures of like Ansel's rivers, rocks, and mountains, which are essential and important. I mean, we all had a different, means of approaching our subjects. My subject has been history. I've always been in it for the history. That was the real value of the archive. Plus, I was working at a really high level and continue to do so in my career, covering big stories, whether it's Vietnam or Sadat going to Israel or Jonestown, 13 presidents, on and on and on. And so because I was working for UPI and Time and Life and Newsweek, I would have tremendous access to these people who are making the news. And so that's what it's about. But you're right about Vietnam. I mean, without the photographs, there's a big gaping hole in the history. So you have to believe what people said or wrote about it. If you're looking at the Peloponnesian Wars, I mean, you take it from text and all that, but those are all people who did have a dog in the hunt. Like the winners usually tell the tales, right?
The winners tell the story.
That's right. And so, but now, ever since the first war photography, which was in the Crimean War, which is right at the beginning of photography, that wasn't like action shots, but the Civil War, particularly. So the Civil War is where we really saw dead people on the battlefield, photographs by Alexander Gardner and Antietam, for instance. And I've done lectures about this, so I'm fascinated with it, because that was the point where you really started to see what really was going on. And that was the point with portraiture, for instance. Like I would ask you this question: do you know who the first president during office or out of office? Who was the first one photographed? It's a good question. And hint.
See, in my mind, I'm going back 100. I'm going back 150 years in my mind.
Well, you've got to figure photography basically starts in 1838, so it was after that. I'll tell you when it was. 1843.
Almost 200 years.
1843 was the
Who was it?
John Quincy Adams.
Oh, I wouldn't have got there.
John Quincy Adams, who after the presidency, obviously his presidency predated photography, but he was a congressman. Afterwards, he ran for Congress, and it was a photograph made sitting in his chair up at the Capitol in 1843. So he was the first guy photographed. So he's the first president, because of that picture, who we really know what they look like.
What he looked like.
There's
Yeah.
all these other, I mean, you think of George Washington, the $1 bill, and
Right.
these are all idealized portraits. In fact, there's a great story about an art critic back in maybe it was a Peel portrait of Washington. And this is somebody who'd seen Washington in the flesh. And he said, based on that picture of George Washington, he would need ID to prove who he was if he walked into a room. So now with photography, and that's not to say that photos can't be manipulated and all that, but
right.
I mean, if it's an honest source, if you're getting it from, a wire photographer or people, trusted messengers, really is what we are, that you could count on what you see is really happened. And that's really what that person looked like. And
well, and I feel like if, as as you were discussing, like your own memory starts to get flimsy or fade. But then when you see a photograph, it takes you right back, doesn't it? And I feel like it does that for society too. Like culture's memory or society's memory regarding Vietnam, to use that as an example, starts to fade as time goes by. But then you see some of those images and you're right back there, or it provides a perspective for someone like myself that was born essentially after the fact.
Right. And to make your point for you, I did an interview with President Ford in 1995. I was working on a big project. And I mean, I don't normally interview people, but I knew him, of course, really well, having been his White House photographer and all that. But we sat down in a conference room in his office in Rancho Mirage. His mind was very good, actually, right up until the end. He it wasn't like Reagan who kind of faded out. But I brought in a stack of photos divided into 10 subjects I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about Richard Nixon, the pardon. I wanted to talk about the end of the Vietnam War, Mrs. Ford's illness. And so we started going through the pictures, and it made such a huge difference for him. I mean, yes, he lived those things.
Right.
But when all of a sudden he was looking and being brought back into the room, essentially, by the photos, and it made for a really good interview. And because it was a very natural conversation. And plus, the one thing a lot of people forget is that I was always the other person in the room. So when you see my photographs from the Gerald Ford presidency, I was in on everything. And so if they talk about this great moment where George Herbert Walker Bush and President Ford are talking and he offers him the CIA director's job, there was Bush, Ford, and Kennerly, always, or whomever.
It's mind-blowing, though.
No, but it's okay. I mean, I don't want to be recognized as being there, because if you see the photos didn't take themselves, obviously. And so...
But I mean, for you personally, that's mind-blowing. Like to state it that way and to really think about the reality of that is incredible to me.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that as a book title. The other book I'm going to do will be the sort of the big photo book, 60 years by the time I get around to it. 60 years of pictures. I'm still wrestling with how do you do that? If you think about 60 years and 2 pictures a year, that's 120 photos, there's a book right there.
Right.
And, obviously I've taken, in many cases, more than 2 good pictures on one day of something, whatever it was.
Right. Of course.
It's hard. It's hard. It's like, all right, what is that book going to be? a lot of people say, well, you should do it as several books. And like Harry Benson is a good example. I mean, he did a Beatles book. I mean, but he has the kind of archive where you can kind of split stuff off like that. And I would like one book that summarizes my career, not just a catalog of my career, but like, what does it all mean? And like, I'm kind of wrestling with that question right now. Like my wife, Rebecca, who's a writer, a professional writer, is always pushing me to think about what it is I'm doing. What did I do? Why did I do it?
Yeah.
And these are hard questions for me because I've lived really in an assignment-driven career. When I'm working for UPI, they say, okay, go cover this, go cover that. I'm not a photo essayist per se, even though you could make the case that the 2.5 years of the Ford administration was a giant photo essay because I was in on everything.
Right.
I did a book called Photo du Jour, which is a picture a day in the year 2000. Every day shooting a couple rolls of film. It was with apologies to Canon, who sponsors me. It was a Mamiya 7, but I shot Canon's the day job stuff. There was the campaigns and everything. But I had this other point of view with the Mamiya, which is like a Leica on steroids with a 43 millimeter lens, which is equivalent to about a 20. So it was kind of a left brain, right brain exercise. It was really fun. It really challenged me as a photographer. And but that one, I guess you could say, was kind of a photo essay, but not really. It was a picture a
Looking
day.
back though, retrospectively, considering all of that, and then thinking again about what you were a part of or what you were witness to at such a young, early age, relatively, like you're 24 and you're going to Vietnam. How did that and what happened there shape you and maybe even prepare you retrospectively again, because you can look back now? How did that shape you and prepare you for all the things that came after?
Well, there were things that even came before that. In 1968, I was at the Ambassador Hotel when Robert Kennedy was shot.
You were there.
I was 21 years old. And when I was—
You were there that day.
Yeah, I was there that night. And but I wasn't in the room. Bill Epridge was in the room. Ron Bennett was in the room. But I got him the last picture where he gives the V sign when he wins the California primary. I mean, it's conceivable he could have gone on to win the presidency. There's no question about it.
Absolutely.
And of course, history has always changed with an event like that, of course. And but I had also covered, when I started with UPI in LA, I covered this guy getting gunned down by the cops, like having him like crawling on the ground. The last live thing he saw was me, and I watched him die. And so I had an ability to kind of take that stuff in stride. I mean, it was you don't ever get used to that, certainly, but so by the time I was 24, in a way, I was kind of like relatively mature, I'd like to think, but it did change me to the degree that I spent 2 years covering that war. I was in Cambodia. I was in the India-Pakistan War. Some of those pictures were in my the Pulitzer work. And then winning a Pulitzer Prize at 25, I mean, that was a shocking event for me. I didn't know I'd been entered. And you didn't ask me this question, but it's part of what has made me who I am, for better or worse, certainly. But to deal with that as a young guy, really just getting going in my career. So at that point, I'd only been out of high school like 10 years. And I had to think what that all meant. And what it meant was, and I could actually answer that one, because the day after I won, Dirk Halstead, who at this point now is working for Time Magazine and had been with UPI, and he'd come into Saigon and he wanted to see where the action was. And so there was a lot of fighting. It was about 25 or 30 miles outside of Saigon, which is close. It'd be like going from where I am now in LA, to like Palm Springs, or not even that far.
Not even that far. Sure.
So we got in the car. Those days, you could just hire a car and a driver to kind of drive you up the road. And we're going to a place called An Loc, and we get ambushed with a group of South Vietnamese airborne rangers who are trying to break into An Loc and get pinned down. It was the worst firefight I'd ever been in, which is saying something. And it was like, I thought, this is so stupid. I mean, here I am. I just won the Pulitzer Prize yesterday, and I'm out there getting shot at big time, and thinking I'm not going to make it out of here. And the overriding thought really was that my friends would think I was a total idiot. I said, can't you just take a day off and celebrate? But no, Kennerly has to go out and get himself killed. I mean, it would have been one of those great, unfortunate, ironic stories.
Oh, man.
But I made it through. I made it. But that's what I concluded. It wasn't like, definitely, I wasn't looking for that, but that kind of action necessarily. But what it meant to me was I had to keep on going. It was a great thing, and it would open doors that led to me being hired by Life magazine.
Isn't there some sort of a to kind of jump off of that a little bit? Isn't there some sort of like maybe a psychological switching of gears? Considering whether they're assignments or whether they're circumstances or situations that you find yourself in. You're in a firefight, right? On one hand, and then maybe 6 months later, you're at the edge of a ring, getting an amazing shot because you're the one in that position to get it and you're ready for it. And then maybe, I don't know, 6 months later, you're in the Oval Office or whatever it is. But those are very wildly different circumstances.
Well, no, and that's a really good question. But you're talking about months, like in between. That's not how it works. In fact, one of my boys, we went to Jordan, and I took the youngest one, James, who is this fall starting a PhD program at the University of Chicago in Chinese literature. But I took him with me to Jordan to photograph the king. And, before that, we went to a refugee camp on the Syrian border, one of the huge refugee camps. And I took him and I took Nick, and one of my other boys. And there we are out with all these people who can't leave the camp, and they've escaped the fighting in Syria. And the Syria's just on the other side of the border. Right. This was a big camp. There were like 100,000 people in this camp, maybe more actually. And we spent the day, and my son Nick played violin with all these kids. He gave them a performance. He's a professional violin player. James is a really good photographer. He taught kids how to take pictures. And then that evening we went to the palace to see the king. So that telescopes exactly what you're saying. You go from the refugee camp to not only just like a higher end world, but a royal world.
Yeah.
On one day. That is how it works for me. That is the being able to change gears is an essential part of my life. And being with soldiers in the field under fire, to being with the general later who's not under fire, right. and going back and forth from the soldiers to the higher ups to into the White House to the guy cleaning the street to all that stuff. It for some reason I have been able to do it without ever grinding the gears. I don't know why. It's also maybe part of the reason why I fortunately escaped the post-traumatic stress problem.
Well, I wanted to ask about that too, right?
Yeah.
Like, that hasn't been much of a factor for you, or do you think
it's a zero factor? Not much of a factor. I never had one nightmare about Vietnam or combat of any kind. I've had weird dreams, but nothing where I know how, and I'm sympathetic to, anybody, including my fellow photographers, colleagues who have been through really rough stuff, and it's had a permanent effect on them. So it's not just soldiers that go through that. I mean, that's a fairly not uncommon. But maybe part of it was the fact that I didn't have to be there and I could leave at any minute.
Yeah, you had that maybe.
I wasn't killing people,
Sure.
although they were trying to kill me, but I never took it personally, which you could. I mean, you could do that, I guess, but it didn't make sense to me. But and I know people who fought their way through that, and I know, particularly the Vietnam era, guys my age, particularly, that have lived with it, and there were a lot of people that never had treatment, and even flash forward to Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, some of whom had 2 or 3 tours of heavy combat activity, and just being in a war zone is anxiety producing. Look at the number of suicides among veterans. I mean, it's a kind of a scandal, really.
So I feel like you have this composition almost that, for whatever reason, has allowed you to not suffer from some of those huge drawbacks. I wonder if, as you, again, retrospectively, you're at a point now where you can look back on this amazing career. What stands out to you if you think of the word gratitude? What are you most grateful for as you look back, and what are you most thankful for as you look back on such an amazing career?
Well, I mean, the fact I've been able to do it, the people would send me out to do it. I was giving a workshop for wounded warriors down at Camp Pendleton. And I found that teaching photography, or not teaching, but helping people learn how to take pictures, not only among people who have affected adversely by war, kids, particularly underprivileged kids, it is teaching them a form of expression that they can do. And not, I mean, everybody can take a picture, but trying to show that you could get into a deeper dive into what you're looking at, and maybe reflect your own problems and all that, and thereby helping ease some of your own stress and so but I was asked the question by one of the participants of the workshop, and I gave a little talk, and I kind of an overview career, kind of Kennerly's magical mystery tour of my life. And he said, could anybody do that today? And that was a great question. Nobody had asked me that, and I hadn't thought about it really. But if you think about the expense of being sent around the world, like I was in the heyday of magazine photography, particularly UPI, but Time, and then Newsweek, and always going on political stuff, going from Washington, D.C. to Cairo 3 times in a month to go with Sadat to Israel, to photograph him in front of the pyramids for the Man of the Year thing. but and jumping on the Concorde and flying to London to go on an Egyptian air flight to Cairo so you could get there faster. Like, if you probably added up, and I've never been able to do it, although I still have a lot of old expense accounts, but in some ways those are fiction. But might be inflating the issue a little. If you added it up about what they paid me to do it and what it cost, the expenses of all that, like it'd be millions of dollars. And people now are just not spending that kind of money to send somebody around to cover stories because they pick up photos locally. Like example, when Muammar Gaddafi was killed, there were people right there with iPhones, and so there's no way to like cover spot news unless you
completely different.
Completely it's different, but it's like you don't have budgets. Like Newsweek was essentially out of business on a print issue or print once a week. I mean, Time is still hanging in. None of them are going to do that. So the answer is no. You can't. If I came along right now, I would never be doing this kind of stuff. And so in a way, I had a magic carpet ride from the 60s through now. I mean, I still work and at the highest level of news and history. And that was all because it goes back to your question about, am I grateful? Yeah, of course.
Right.
And I didn't get bumped off, didn't get wounded even, other than my ego occasionally. But, and I think, I'm damn grateful for it. And the people would believe enough in me. But I mean, I worked so hard at it. I'm very competitive. And, we talk about America being a place where if you work hard enough, you can succeed. I don't necessarily believe that. I think a lot of people work really hard and are frustrated by defeat and all that. But it's true to the degree in my case where, I had the opportunities to do it. I took advantage of it. A lot of it stems from being the son of a traveling salesman and learning how to sell people things they probably didn't want. That was the way my dad could do it. And what I'm selling really is you on the idea of letting me into your life so I could take pictures. That's not that easy. And there has to be a trust factor and all that. So there's so many elements that go into what I've done and how I do it. And I can write about it to some degree, but I don't know that anybody could necessarily, I don't think I could teach it. I can't teach somebody to be me, certainly.
Of course.
I can give you advice, but everybody has their own way of doing stuff.
Well, and you've written lots of books, I know. And so this is one thing I wanted to make sure I asked you about because it stuck out to me because of my own personal tastes. You wrote a book about Seinfeld, the show, the final days of the show.
Right.
Can you talk to me a little bit about that? That's my all-time favorite show. I watched it in real time as it was airing in the 90s, all throughout the 90s.
Right.
And how and why with that book for you?
Well, first of all, it started as it was a Newsweek assignment.
Okay.
And so, but here's where I had, this is where the selling thing came in because they didn't want, you remember the final episode, which wasn't that great, but because they tried.
Right, it wasn't.
Photographically, it was good because they brought all those.
Because everybody was there.
Yeah. So there was this courtroom scene, where they're all sitting in the courtroom, but they basically, the premise of that last show is that they're getting called on their, all
it was
their
like the Good Samaritan law, right?
Yeah, and so they're going to court for like screwing over all these people over, which is essentially what it was about.
Right.
It was about nothing except for that, And, but so it was a big secret, that they didn't want anybody to know, like what the show was about. This is supposed to be a big surprise,
Right.
And I said, look, and I got into a conversation with Larry David about that, because backing up a little bit, I sent a note to Jerry Seinfeld through his agent. And I said, Newsweek would like me to photograph this. Normally I don't do Hollywood stuff, but your show is American cultural history.
Yeah.
And I would like to photograph your show the same way I would work in the White House, like behind the scenes as history is being made. And your last show is really important to a lot of people, certainly all of you. And, honestly, I went right for his ego. I said, okay, this is me, the Pulitzer Prize winning photographer, wanting to come in because you guys are so important.
Right.
And I wrote a hell of a good letter there, and he bought it. And so, and I mean, it was going to be Newsweek. And the other part is that they weren't going to own my pictures. Normally, if you get hired by them to shoot something, you're giving up rights and all that.
Right.
I owned it. And I was going to, and I did it in black and white. And so the one hitch came when Larry David, who knew nothing about this, and he had co-written the last episode and all that. I mean, Larry David's my age, but when I was going into the soundstage over at Studio City for the first day of shooting of the final episode, he and I both kind of got locked out, and because they closed the doors at a certain time, and we both, thank God, he was out, or I probably would have gotten in for that first.
Yeah, he's the right guy to get locked out with.
But he's like, "Who are you?" And I'm explained. He said, "Well, what are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I'm here to shoot the." He said, "No, okay, this can't work out." And he said, "This is the whole thing, is a secret." And I looked at him. I said, "Larry," he said, "when I was in the White House, I knew where all the nukes were. And if I could keep those kind of secrets, I'm sure as hell not going to say anything about Seinfeld's last episode." So
how did he take that? How did he take that?
Funny. No. It's like, it wasn't his call anyway. Sorry, Larry. But he came around, and then he goes and talks to Jerry, and Jerry says, "No, I want him to be here."
Right.
Larry David hadn't been on the show for a couple of years. You probably know better than I do. Anyway. Yeah. So it was a fascinating experience. The most intriguing character for me was Michael Richards playing Cramer. And he is nothing at all like in real life as that Cramer character. I mean, he's a terrific actor, but he was always wary of the camera. People that are wary and that they're aloof are much more interesting to me than, "Hey, come over and take my picture," and all that. No, Jerry Seinfeld was Jerry Seinfeld. I mean, he was totally cool. He's the centerpiece of the show. He is playing himself. Right. Everybody else is acting, Julia Louis-Dreyfus and Jason Alexander, whom I had met and photographed when I did a Time cover. It was a Neil Simon cover.
Sure.
For that he was in Broadway Bound. Mm-hmm. And Jason was one of the actors. And so I had met him, but I didn't know the other people. But I fit right in. And the secret of doing this kind of stuff is really being discreet in the background and all that. And I had one incident where before every show, they get together, they have this kind of a group hug, and they like to get psyched up to go out when they do the stage part of, and you could hear them backstage, but you wouldn't know what they were doing. And I told Jerry, like, Michael saw me and they're like hugging, and I'm back in the corner. I knew this is a private moment, had never been photographed. And I said, of course I got to shoot it, right? And I told Jerry, he said, "Oh, I don't know, this is pretty private." And I said, "Look, I'll shoot it, and if you don't want it to be used, fine. I'll give you the negatives. And but if I don't shoot it, you're not going to have it, and you're going to want it at some point. And I said, okay, go ahead and do it. So I'm back in the corner, and Michael Richards sees me, and he's going like, hey, and like it's almost like Cramer doing that. And Charlie says, don't worry about it. He kind of grabs me, but they do their hug and they do their thing. And it was a good photo, and it's in the book. And so, and then the book came out of that. I mean, it wasn't done for a book, but I talked them into doing the book. And we were all participants in the book. And we went through photos, and they commented about all those pictures. And so the commentary really was what you were talking about earlier about being brought back to the moment, even though the moments weren't that far away because we did it pretty quickly after that. But it was great commentary. And,
it's amazing,
and I thought it was a good depiction of the last days.
Now, the other thing that I wanted to ask you about too was that you talked about Canon earlier. You're a founding member of the Explorers of Light.
I'm an early member. I don't know if I was one of the first ones, but definitely it's been over 25 years now. And I switched from Nikon to Canon in 1995. And really, Dirk Halstead had been after me forever. He was using Canons from the get-go. I'd always had Nikons, but when autofocus came out, that was when, like, it was apparent that Canon had a better product there for the autofocus. And I just thought, okay, I'll try it. And I had a conversation with Newsweek. Well, Newsweek hired me to cover the 96 campaign, and it was a big deal that I was going to do it. And then, but I hadn't been shooting a lot, and I had the Nikons. I thought it was time to upgrade my Nikons, and Nikon wouldn't give me the time of day. And so Dirk hooked me up with Canon, and they essentially, rolled back the truck up with all this new Canon gear to my house. And all of a sudden, I'm a Canon user, and they had a rep come and show me how to use it. And oh my God, I mean, I loved the gear. And so it started with, it was still film, obviously, at that point. And then the evolution through into digital and all that. But yeah, I mean, the Explorers of Light program, it's just this great group of people. Halstead was one of the first ones, and a lot of my contemporaries. And essentially, it's not a matter of money. I would never endorse something that I didn't use, that I didn't feel was the best product around. And not by way of dumping on other cameras. There's a lot of good stuff out there, but these are my cameras of choice. I get paid more money in one day on a corporate job than I would in 3 years of being a Canon Explorer of Light. And so it's not about the money. It's about being comfortable that I have the best gear. And so now I'm using the R5 mirrorless cameras with their lenses, astonishing gear. I mean, that's all I can say. It's, but it still boils down to the person behind the camera. I play golf. If I have really expensive golf clubs, I'm still a crappy golfer, so I know how these companies sell these duffers on this thing. I get it. But Canon, I think, will enhance your ability to take better pictures, but you still have to have, some ability to do it. If you're a good photographer or want to be a good photographer, I couldn't recommend anything more highly than Canon cameras, and the proof is in the pudding. But I still do use the iPhone. We did a book on iPhone photography, and Canon's never given me a hard time about that. And so no conflict on that one.
Let me ask you one last question. I've thought about this one too, all things considered. Because with someone like you, with you in particular, there's so much that we could just dive into, like decade and then even narrow it down to years. But what I would like to know is that when 100 years from now, when people look back on your life as a whole, what else are they going to be able to see and read about that hasn't happened yet? What's next?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, the idea of putting it all together in one book is very appealing to me. But I think what I hope people will see from my work is that I delivered the truth, that what you're looking at happened. It's real. It's not manipulated. Nowadays, when we have these vehicles like Twitter, which is really an evil thing because it makes people like me who shouldn't be doing it say things about people that I shouldn't say, that want to say. And so,
Right.
But I think in terms of, well, when you boil it down to like, what's a career about? And I'm kind of thinking about like, what does it all mean? I'm not sure I'm the person to actually tell you what that is. I think other people should do it when they make their own assessment of the work. But it really is about delivering reality and giving you a better perspective on the things that happened that I saw directly. Because my career's been in large part about going to places that people didn't want to go to take pictures of things that they didn't want to see.
Right.
But it's important that you see them. And so this is kind of what we do as photographers. Not just me. I mean, thank God for the photographers. They are among the most important people on the planet in telling you what's really going on.
Wow. I think that was really well said. Thank you for that. And thank you for your time too.
Oh, it's great. I'm really glad I didn't miss it. It was a close call. It was a close call.
We made it happen.
It wasn't your fault. It was like, anyway, I mean, for all the slowness and like next week, and I don't know when it's going to run, but I'm going to go back to Washington, D.C. to photograph my good friend, Liz Cheney, who's I've known since she was 8 years old, essentially become Joan of Arc on the Republican stake. And, having worked at the Ford White House, I got to know her dad really well. And I've just known her over the years. And she's one of the great, honest politicians. And it seems to be a disappearing breed. And thank God for people like her, because truth tellers. That's what photographers are. They're truth tellers through their lenses. And fortunately, there are a lot of people like Liz Cheney still out there. I'm very optimistic ultimately about how things go, but it's a rough ride.
Well, I will take, you know what? I will take that as a positive note to end on. And I thank you for your time. And I wish you the best. And I'll keep my eyes open for more David Hume Kennerly images coming down the pipe.
You could go. I have an Instagram feed, David Hume Kennerly on Instagram, and Twitter is just Kennerly. But don't look at it. I'm very biased. Let's just say
Thank you so much.
Big Trump fan, for instance. Okay, we'll say, but the words will play that out. So,
that's perfect.
Thanks a lot. See you.
All right. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Hey guys, thanks for watching this conversation presented by White House Custom Color on YouTube. Be sure to check out our other content and click that subscribe button right there. Right. Right there. It's there somewhere.